And then they asked me what I thought about that. And I said, if the company has a great culture, that is very important. It should show up in the numbers. In other words, if it doesn't show up in the numbers, then it can't be very important. So just focus on the numbers. But I do think you're right that so when you focus on the right thing about the numbers, then you'll get the right answer. But I don't think people know how to read the numbers in context of, does this mean they have a great culture? Does it mean the system is working? Where is the company hungry? Where is it kind of, getting enough oxygen to breathe? It's just a different layer of insights when you look at it differently.
The system creates the behavior, and the behavior creates the results. Why growth exposes problems instead of solving them. How people behave, what gets rewarded, and what gets ignored. Why companies misread their own performances, and why a brand only works when the businesses can actually deliver what it promises. Hey, Christopher, would you please introduce yourself?
I'm Chris Graham. I run a private equity fund based out of Atlanta. We're a North American focused fund in the lower middle market.
So when we first met, I thought that you are really financial organization, that you run financial organization. And then I realized this is new. This is really fascinating what you're doing. So financial is the outcome, not methodology. The result comes from how the businesses operate, not from financial operations. So here's the question. What do people get wrong when they think about business through financial lens?
I think it's interesting that there's a layer behind businesses. And what's interesting is if you know how to read the financials with those underlying elements in place, then it's not misleading. But most people don't know how to understand the underlying elements, right? So what I always say is when I look at financials, the business is talking to me. It's telling you where it needs resources. It's telling you where it's overwhelmed. It's telling you where it has weak leaders, where it has strong leaders. It's literally talking to you through the financials. But most people can't read the underneath part of that. And the underneath part of that is systems. At heart, I'm really a systems theorist. I see systems everywhere and I try to improve on those systems. And business is really, and it varies, it's systems. It's all systems. And it's systems within systems, right?
We'll get into that. Let me ask you this question, okay? When you look at a company, what do you focus on first?
I actually do focus on the financials. And I was on a panel one time and they asked, how important is culture in a business? Now, I will tell you that I think it's very important. And these other two panelists with me said that they work really hard to figure out the culture of the business before they acquire a business. And then they asked me what I thought about that. And I said, if the company has a great culture, that is very important. It should show up in the numbers. In other words, if it doesn't show up in the numbers, then it can't be very important. So just focus on the numbers. But I do think you're right that so when you focus on the right thing about the numbers, then you'll get the right answer. But I don't think people know how to read the numbers in context of, does this mean they have a great culture? Does it mean the system is working? Where is the company hungry? And where is it kind of getting enough oxygen to breathe? It's just a different layer of insights when you look at it differently. And I think people typically look at these things up and to the right for revenue, up and to the right for EBITDA, right? That's what they're looking at. But there's a whole world behind that you can't see from just those two factors.
Fascinating. So let's go deeper into it. System drives behavior. We spoke about that. People don't act randomly. The system happens how they think and perform. Okay, so here's a question. What does system drives behavior actually looks like in a company? And the second question next to it, where do leaders misunderstand or create wrong behavior, right?
But it happens most often in compensation. So there's a great book by Elliot Jacques called Requisite Organization. I think we've talked about this before.
Yep.
And it actually lays out this really fascinating psychological concept. So Elliot Jacques is a psychiatrist, but he was a business-focused psychologist, organizational psychology,
Yep.
and books like that. And he talks about these time span of discretion elements that everybody has. And you think about it, you ever read the marshmallow test, right? Delayed gratification. So the marshmallow test is actually a more modern version of this time span of discretion, as Elliot Jacques lays out. In other words, if you have a long delayed gratification capability, you probably inherently have a longer time span of discretion. So what is time span of discretion? It's the ability to be self-directed for a long period of time. right? Longer period of time is long and shorter. So what's interesting is there is a check the box rule in private equity, just as an example. And I just went through this with another fund where I said, look, I don't think about it that way, but I understand that you do. And they said, we have to give equity to these key individuals. I said, I get it, but what's the goal of
Yep.
compensation? The goal of compensation is to drive behavior. Your exact question, right? And so if somebody has a very short time span of discretion, how is a 10-year out equity check going to matter to them?
Yep.
You can't even conceive of it, right? And what we find statistically, like on the ground in our companies, we have to dial in compensation bonuses to reward behavior at a scale that the employee gets. If we make compensation bonuses too far out and it's not built to their standard of time span of discretion, then it doesn't mean anything. It has no meaning. It doesn't drive behavior. So it's a system of compensation that actually misaligns with the person's own perspective on what best impacts their life. You have to get those things in alignment instead of just checking a box that says, oh, we have to give them equity. That's what it says in the checkbox. That's what we do
Yeah.
next, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of private equity works in these little checkbox rules that don't actually account for the real world.
All right. So thank you. There's a question that's going to frame that. Why incentives fails?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Incentives often assume people act logically, but they respond basic on reality, not theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why
That's the
most
time
of
spent
incentive
discretion.
system fail on changing behaviors, and how should incentives actually be designed? I
Yeah.
can't wait that you give me
Yeah.
the
Yeah, so you time span of discretion, you kind of dial in on time span of discretion, but also the right KPIs. Now, I also think that these measurables that we put in place for people to target, a lot of times people will get locked on one thing. And maybe it's in the financials, maybe it's profit or one element. But the truth is, if you have two or three, no more than three, but two or three kind of key targets and change them periodically. Have
oh
you ever heard of the Hawthorne effect?
no.
The Hawthorne effect is this kind of psychological anomaly where if you go into a business and you change something, anything. So they did this in a office building in Washington, is where they first discovered this in the state of Washington. They changed the lights. They made them brighter. Seattle's a very dark place. So it's kind of rainy all the time. So they made really bright lights. And what they found is they got an 18% bump in productivity. He said, this is amazing. We have to tell everyone around the country to change their lights to higher intensity lights. He said, but first we have to steady state it. We got to put in the old lights and let it go back down. We'll do it again. We got to replicate the experiment. So they put in the old lights, and guess what they found? Another increase in productivity. It wasn't the lights intensity, it was just the change, right? And actually, it's interesting. Human beings, if you go outside, your body doesn't say, oh, it's 72 degrees. Well, your body says it's warmer or colder than what I had, right? It only measures change. Our bodies are built to measure change. They're not built to measure state. They're built to measure change in state. Because of that, when you make a change in a business that's open, obvious, and visual, people change their behavior pretty dramatically. They actually become more engaged in their work, more engaged in their environment, and better productivity just as a matter of change. So getting alignment and compensation to the time span of discretion, and then also picking KPIs. But I think a lot of times people will pick these driving indicators and then they'll just leave them there, like workplace errors with things like that. But if you change them periodically, you get this deeper engagement.
I love that theory. So what are the three, we're saying three KPIs, right? Should we call them
Three
KPIs?
KPIs, yeah.
What are the traditional what are the usual suspects, if you will?
Any of them are good, to tell you the truth. Sometimes you get, so I'll give you a great example.
Thank you.
This is at a senior executive level, and this drives me crazy.
Love it.
So this is a CEO level type of functionality that doesn't work. It can't work. It mathematically doesn't work, and everybody does it. And it doesn't make any sense to me still to this day. There's lots of books written about it, and it's about budgeting. So if you project at the beginning of the year a budget for the year, it doesn't actually mean anything. It's a lot of wasted time, energy, and effort. Budgets are for a closed system. If I say, Van, I'm going to give you $1 million and you have to live on that budget for your R&D spend for the year. Okay, then you got to budget out how you're going to spend that money. But in an open system where you're trying to create more revenue, If you have a 300 item general ledger or a P&L, and you're 99.7% accurate on everything on your general ledger, you know that you'll be about 20% off. 4% chance of being accurate on your budget. Doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't mean anything. And the problem is that this year's numbers, the things as a system, that companies' numbers that they're going to hit this year aren't determined by what you say on January 1st. They're determined by why you're doing last year, January 1st. And it's already baked in. So
Yeah.
you're trying to predict something that you can't change it. So why focus on it? You burn a lot of energy focus on it. So instead, what we do, and there's a great book called Halo Effect that actually talks about
Yes.
this. Great book. And so we focus on short term, 1 month or less iterative effects. That's a great KPI. Because you can change things. The month we get great feedback month to month. And we look at 3 to 5 year, what do I want to be when I grow up kind of directives. So we have what we call a high-low strategy. High is what we want to be eventually, and low is month to month or week to week or day to day, something that's very 1 month or less iterative data points. That's great KPIs, is the 1 month or less.
Thank you. I'm learning this from you, so I'm asking a question in that sense. We're talking about buffers.
Buffers, yeah.
Buffers hide the problems. Extra time, people, or resources make things look stable, but often hide deeper issues. Buffers, right? What are the main buffers inside of businesses? How you define them? Give us a little bit more of that. And what happened when you remove them, which is even more interesting.
That's really systems approach to business, right? That's how systems work within businesses. Is managing these buffers. Our system is a buffer management system. Interestingly, JIT or Lean, the Japanese system, is a buffer management system, but it's one buffer. We look at all buffers in the business. And when I was back before I was in private equity, I was practicing law, and it struck me as odd that these law firms or these financial firms would have these rules in place that was to protect the company from liability from the worst of their employees, right? So in other words, they would limit all of their employees to this really baseline rule. Nobody can do this. It wasn't that the law required it, is that the worst employees, really the really bad ones, both ethically and or mentally, like just didn't have the capability to be there, they would get the company in trouble because they wouldn't do it correctly. But what it ended up doing, it was odd to me. I thought, well, your best employees might be really good at helping your clients with that. But you're saying they can't do it because your worst employees, that's what we call a policy buffer.
Wow.
Take that and extrapolate it to businesses, right? You're taking your best efforts and you're contracting it down to something that's a policy to buffer you from liability. Now, in that case, this buffer, this policy buffer, it's protecting you from liability you could control. You know how you can control it? Don't hire dummies. Just don't hire them, right? Just get rid of those people that can't do the job effectively or that are bad people or immoral or unethical, right? Don't hire those people, but you put your policy buffers that limit the best of what you could achieve. The same is true in these other buffers, and there's all kinds of buffers, but the main three in business are labor, time, and inventory. I saw a great article that was an interview with Elon Musk recently. Again, I don't think people realize why they're doing this, the system way they're doing this or why they're doing this. But he had said, why do you think you have such a dramatic impact on these businesses? How can you get things out of them that other people aren't getting out of them? And he said, I take all time requirements and I cut it down to a 50-50 chance. Interesting, right? All time requirements of a goal trying to achieve. And I cut the time down to a level where there's a 50-50 chance whether they'll get it right or not, or they'll be able to do it or not at that time. Interesting. That's eliminating the time buffer. He's just squeezed out a time buffer. There's another business system called theory of constraints that's about a time buffer management. JIT is about inventory buffer management. So labor, inventory, time are the biggest three buffers. And I know when I go into a company, I'll sit in these management team meetings when we're trying to see if we're going to buy this company. And I'll ask them, tell me about what happens when there's a big customer problem. And they'll say, Chris, you should see it. It's great. We all pull together as a team and we work nights and we work weekends and we solve the problem. The customer doesn't even know they had the problem, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll say, great. Then what happens? Oh, then we go back to our regular jobs. Nobody ever stops to ask, what caused the problem? Was it something we could control or something that was beyond our control? If it was something in your control, you should fix it so it never happens again. But nobody's asking that next level of question. And that's what we do. We thin buffers to reveal flaws, and then we fix not just the problem the flaw caused, but the flaw. There's a famous kind of story about Ono in Japan, Toyota, when he was told by his COO that he had half of his presidents were crushing their metrics, the other half were failing. He thought, that's interesting. And his COO said, you have to bonus these really good presidents or you're going to lose them. And he went out on the floor and he watched the presidents that were doing well. And he watched the ones that were not doing well according to the metrics, to your point, metrics. And what he realized was the ones that were failing had thinned out their buffers and were trying to fix the flaws. So, of course, they weren't hitting their metrics because they're trying to fix things, right? Eventually, they will hit their metrics. The ones that were hitting their metrics were thickening up the buffers so they didn't have to deal with the flaws. So, in the short term, that looks better. In the long term, that's actually a problem. You know what he did?
Wow.
He fired the presidents that were thickening up the buffers. He embraced the ones that had all the flaws and he elevated them. And here we are today.
That's called survival bias.
Survivor bias, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly
Survival bias.
great. Yeah, great tie together there, man. That's all right. Yeah.
Great story. The most fascinating thing is about it is about buffers. So do you want to elaborate more on those more stories? I love stories.
Yeah, we've done it before. We've done it but I'll tell you, buffers and gates are two of the tools we use the most. So if we thin out a buffer labor, we had a problem, one of our companies, we thinned out our accounting team and all these flaws started to appear, right? The flaws were things that we could control, but because we had people, we just overwhelmed it with time. People's time committed to fixing these things as they popped up, instead of going back to the source and making sure we're getting clean information from the beginning. So another tool that we use to help with our buffers is gates. So once you thin a buffer and then you see the flaw, gating is an incredible tool. So that data that we used to get in kind of unclean, we have to clean it up on the back end with all these accounting people. Now we have less accounting people. We can't do that. So what we did was we put a gate in the front that said, salesperson, it's both sales and production. You can't enter the data without having it accurate on the front end. When we did that, everything cleaned up, self-righted the system. Very cool.
I know that we haven't spoke about these, but what are the psychological insights that you attach to the buffering?
I think it's a couple things, but one is you think about everybody's busy doing their job.
Yeah.
And so to do things that are more than my job it's hard to, so what we find is that the problem we name is the problem we solve. But naming the problem, when you're not sure what the problem is, it's hard. Identifying it is the hard part. It takes a lot of work, actually. Solving it actually is not that hard once you figure out what the problem is. But to dig in and really figure out what the problem is, and here's what we have a lot of, and as you can imagine, this is pretty classic. So I don't know that I'm revealing any secrets here. If you lean in and you say, okay, this happened, and it happened because of how we're doing this. Can you tell me why do we do it that way? The first answer is always, because that's how we've always done it, right? Nobody wants to think beyond that. It's just the way it's done. And why is that the way we've always done it? Because this person taught it to this person. Literally in the Japanese system, 5 whys to get to the lowest level. Yeah. But do you know, this is interesting to me, might not be interesting to everybody else, but the Japanese system was actually derivative of a guy named W.E. Deming. So W.E. Deming is a Detroit industrialist. And in America at that time, we had lots of space and lots of people and lots of time, and we could just keep producing the inventory. It just didn't matter. In Japan, they had a very different market. Limited space, limited people. They had to be more efficient with their physical space. And so Deming's theories on business actually weren't very impactful in the United States at that time. But in 1950s, the Japanese hired him, Toyota hired him to advise them on how to fix their company. And Deming taught them customer pull-through and this thinner buffers. And so Deming is one of the originals in that space. He was born in 1900 and 1990. You can imagine all the changes he saw in manufacturing and process over that time period. So Deming taught the Japanese the core, the early seeds of what it was to become JIT system. It's actually pretty interesting to think about.
Very cool. Have you seen Moneyball with Brad Pitt?
Yeah, it's a great book. Yeah, I love the movie and the book. Yeah.
Let me ask you another question. Now narrowing down to the brand versus reality, right? How those things hang together. Brand only works if the business can deliver. always being that way. If not visibly make things worse. The one things gets stretched or business on the brand, right? So they don't align. There's no harmony. What happens when a company promises more than it can deliver?
Yeah. No, it's terrible. And I think, and this is one thing I'd struggle with a little bit is when do you make your brand effort? In other words, I think in one side, I would say there's no better time than the president, that right? Seize
Oh
all the
yeah,
time you can, right?
yeah,
Make a brand effort.
yeah.
But in a company that you've owned a while, it's different than a company you just bought because in the company you just acquired, you're still, for us, we're still trying to figure out the flaws in the system and fix those flaws. And so as we thin buffers, we know there's going to be disappointed clients along the way as we thin these buffers. We know we're going to cause it and we're going to overcome it because we've got a great team. Team trains on our system, right? We train with those managers on the ground on the system. But would you brand, I ask you, would you brand before you fix the system or would you brand after? Interesting
After,
question.
right.
After, what you say? I would say
Yeah,
after, yeah.
I think so. Makes
Is
more
it?
sense.
Yeah, because the system can't deliver on the promise until after you fix it up.
I would argue that sometimes if you look in the system inside and then project it on the customers that we might get, which is just the testing, we'll get different results, then business have to adjust. We're talking about alignment, right? How those two entities align.
Yeah. Actually, Ben, so I'll ask you this question in context of this. Now I'm interviewing you. So, this in context, what I would say is this in our system, what we do is we map. Now, mapping is kind of the core of a lot of systems. So, again, it's not new to us, but we map in three phases. First, we map workstations according to management. Then, we map employee responsibilities according to employees. And then we use this Deming, this W.E. Deming approach to customers by going on site, seeing the customers, really evaluating what better looks like for them and try to deliver better. So we try to map out what an ultimate customer experience looks like. Then we move the workstations to fulfill that experience. And then we move the employees to fill those workstations. That's complete alignment. Part of the Deming process of observing and asking the customers could be brand, what do you call it, investigation or brand inquiry as well.
Or auditing, I will say, or
Brand audit. Yeah.
but the way I see it, I have a different, I'm saying accurately defining what the business really does for the customers, right? In that analysis, you realize that, or you might realize that everything is cool, everything is fine. We can tweak the buffers, so really increase the optimize the business, right? But also there's opportunities that business model not going to necessarily uncover what is could happen, that there's a different verticals and verticals that business might be considering creating an ecosystem. And going back to what you were saying, Elon Musk, Tesla is automobile and has a four-wheel steering wheel, all that pretty much as a Ford. But actually Tesla is not transportation, neither vehicle company. It is electric energy storing electricity. It's a battery company. And from that perspective, it's much more to the customers than it's just category automotive, it's solar panels and charging station, etc., etc. So thinking through the verticals, maybe. Anyways, this is a conversation for a whole another podcast. But thank you for reversing it. I like thinking about it. So it is about framing a business, so it really has a different intent toward the customers to serve them better with everything, to serve them better. I think that's it's more accurately defining the business, and it in sometimes really does influence the business model itself.
Yeah,
right?
it does. It should. It is exactly what Deming said. So Deming, his whole approach was, I don't know if you know this story about Henry Ford. Dodge had started putting out like blue cars, red cars, and
Yes.
Henry Ford was committed to black cars. We're going to only do black. His son is the one that kind of twisted his arm, but Henry Ford almost crashed the business because he wouldn't put out different color versions. Well, we do black cars. Deming said that you don't determine what value is. The
Oh yeah.
customer is the one that determines value, not you. And that changes everything around. Just because you can do something doesn't mean it's valuable. And actually, in these small businesses, man, that we acquire, we know that these companies generally chase revenue. They don't chase
Oh yeah.
profit. And so when we show them what the market appreciates, we have this very specific thing we do. We call it a gross margin heat map. When we do that, we can show them exactly what the market appreciates that they do and what it doesn't really appreciate that they do. And it's fascinating to show them that the market does not care about these three things that you do. I don't know why you're doing them anymore, right? Because the customer defines value. And they'll feel very proud about of these 7 things they do, numbers 6 and 7. They're very proud of those things that they do. But the market doesn't care about those at all. You can see it in the margins, right?
Wow.
Just doesn't care. So when you show it to them in a visual that goes from green to red of margins, then they go, huh, but they're not so proud of it anymore.
Wow. That's so fascinating.
Yeah, it changes their perspective.
But the thing is, Chris, you don't see those things that you do. They're not popular. They're hidden. And
I've never seen, actually, I don't think any company we've seen, I don't think any private equity group does it because they're not in the books. We've never seen a company accurately calculate gross margin. They do it based on these concepts of fixed costs and variable costs that are outdated and actually don't apply. There's no such thing as a fixed cost. People will always say, I'll challenge everybody that I meet. Tell me a fixed cost. They'll say rent. Okay. But if you're growing, rent's not fixed. And if you're shrinking, rent's not fixed. So I guess only if you're exact and the fact is rent per square foot goes up, it's not fixed at all. And I think people have these ideas about what goes into operating expenses versus what goes into cost of goods. So, well, there's only one way to do it. One way. It's all mathematical. You take the names out and you just say, show me all expenses over a 5-year period and show me the correlation coefficient to revenue over that same period. That's it. Just a ratio. 1.1 to 1, 0.8 to 1, whatever it is. You get that ratio, that will tell you your actual cost of goods sold.
And the last thing a question I have for you is, do you have any question for me?
Yeah, brand, like we talked a little bit, I probably am. Because my mind works in these systems and managed feedback loops. For me, the scary part, so our business is, I think we might have talked about this, but we buy B2B businesses generally. In fact, exclusively. They're in all kinds of different B2B. But one thing I think that influenced me on building our selection mechanism is the fact that my feeling is that consumers are fickle. It's hard to measure their brand loyalty. It's hard to keep their loyalty. Like that branding side, I think is much more impactful on a B2C side.
You're absolutely right. In the B2B space, the brand is got a little bit more repressed or not taken as seriously as it should. And there's a good reasons for that, right? And I call it, among friends, an irrational part of the business. And that is, the brand is that irrational part of the business, why we do business with some and we don't do with others, how that stay on top of our minds, and why many people really have a not understanding for the brand, right? So it is open. I will try not to give direct answers, just frame it as a love affair with business that we love and business that we not loving so much. And the brand is big. Brand goes internally, and it's a part of the culture, why people do something, why people love to work, and how they're effective and efficient at their work, and how they are not, right? How they hate this, and why would I do this? That's not my job, and I will do anything to make my company really works. That is all brand. Is like unbelief. An irrational part of the business is much, much bigger than the rational part. Okay.
So as a consumer-facing brand, how often should you refresh your brand to be aligned with your customer to create long-term value? Because this is one of the fears I have in the consumer space. It's why we avoid it. Is a lot of things seem very short-term, fly-by-night, overnight success here and gone, right? How would you avoid that through a branding exercise?
So your question is about frequency of the branding effort. So if we separate, there's a business and business operation, what we and I will talking about today. There's a customer, and between customer and business is the brand, is that thing that is a soft issue, love affair, right? That is about loving one brand and not loving other brand and disliking some other brand. I think we can talk about, in this context of this question, is really about relationships. So how the relationship has to be built. I think we know that, right? Buying flowers, saying hello, staying in touch. being kind and genuine and authentic, all those great qualities, consistent, responsive. I think all these is speaking about frequency, right? And I'm framing these as a homework that we do. It's like how we prepare brain and how we keep it fresh and clean, and we stay in touch, and that makes brain really function and being staying on top of people's mind. But not only that, it's always there for you. It's always works when you need it. It recognizes, it's proactive and does things,
Delivers on the promise. Yeah.
and it's always there consistently does that, stay authentic and clear, and etc. So those are brain strength, if you will. I will just project ideal picture is that brain is a lever, right? You dial it up and dial it down, so it's a part of the infrastructure. It's a constantly measurable measures, right? So how it's implemented throughout the organization is a very different things. That's a different question. We can talk about details, but it is a part of it's a built inside the organization, so it's a measured constantly, and there's a dial that always show you it's up or down, and how we can leverage it to grow the business. It's a business.
So not a periodic effort, it's a constant effort.
It could be, right? So this thing periodically measure my heartbeat. I think it is depends on the frequency. I think if it constantly measure my heartbeat, it will give me much more like a high density data about the business and my heartbeat, right? I actually realized that you have a really broad and sincere understanding of the branding, except you are not vocalizing, you don't use the language that will express the brand. And you're looking clearly inside of the organization, while brand tends to look inside and reflect out. It's not in a spectrum, but you are looking at the insides of employees and how they do things.
Not often. I always go in and I'll say, okay, they say they do this, but what do they really do? Right? What do they really do? And that's what you're saying. That's a branding exercise. There was a company that we used to have that called themselves a textile company. They didn't make any textiles. They were a chemical company. Now they used chemicals to coat textiles, but they were actually a chemical company. So when I looked at them, they had this great R&D and proprietary chemical products that could be extrapolated into non-textile environments, but they were so tied up in being a textile company.
Yeah.
You could see that, right?
Chris, I really appreciate this. This is lovely, and we're going to do this again.
Yeah, it's great to see you.
Thank you.